Ever wake up with that nagging feeling that something's off? Now imagine discovering that your perfect executive assistant, the one who remembers how you take your coffee, anticipates your every need, and has made himself utterly indispensable, has been systematically drugging you for months. Slipping psychedelics into your morning coffee. Photographing confidential documents while you sit at your desk in a chemically induced haze. Methodically dismantling your empire from within while you sign papers you can't remember reading. That's not paranoia. That's my Tuesday. My name is Victor Harrington. At 67, I've built Harrington Financial Group into a Wall Street powerhouse with $11 billion in managed assets and 3 floors of prime Manhattan real estate with my name on the building. I didn't get here by being nice. When my assistant of 7 years started showing subtle signs of insubordination, the occasional eye roll, too many personal emergencies, I did what any self-respecting CEO would do. I replaced her. Nothing personal, just business. How was I supposed to know that her replacement would turn out to be the most sophisticated corporate saboteur I'd ever encountered? Daniel Moore walked into my office that October morning like he belonged there. Impeccable Wharton MBA. 5 years at Goldman Sachs. Firm handshake, respectful but not obsequious manner. Within a week, I wondered how I'd managed without him. He reorganized my filing system, streamlined my meeting schedule, and seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to anticipate my needs. Your coffee, Mr. Harrington. Black with a splash of almond milk. He'd place it exactly where I preferred, right side of the desk, handle facing out. How did you know I switched from cream? I asked, genuinely surprised. You mentioned it to Dr. Winters during your call yesterday. I was finalizing the Anderson contract in your outer office. That was Daniel, always listening, always observing. Not in a creepy way, but with the attentiveness of someone dedicated to excellence. Or so I thought. My partners noticed the change in my operation. Your new boy is something else, remarked James Whitaker, my oldest friend and co-founder, during after-hours drinks. The quarterly numbers have never been stronger. It was true. Since Daniel had joined, we'd closed 3 major deals that had been stalled for months. Client satisfaction ratings were up. Even my notorious temper had mellowed. He's efficient, I acknowledged, downplaying my satisfaction. I'd learned long ago never to praise employees too lavishly, it bred complacency. James chuckled. Efficient? Victor, the man practically reads your mind. Half the office thinks he's some kind of AI experiment. I laughed, though something about the observation unsettled me slightly. Daniel's ability to anticipate my thoughts had become almost uncanny. That morning, he'd ordered lunch from a Sicilian restaurant I'd been thinking about but hadn't mentioned to anyone. Thought you might be in the mood for caponata, he'd said. You mentioned Sicily in the Stevens meeting last week. Had I? I couldn't specifically recall. My memory wasn't what it used to be, a fact I acknowledged privately but never publicly. In a business built on confidence, admitting cognitive decline would be tantamount to professional suicide. It started with small things. Memory lapses. Finding myself in rooms with no recollection of why I'd entered. Signing documents I couldn't remember reviewing. Each time, Daniel was there with a reassuring smile, guiding me through the fog. The first truly strange incident occurred in mid-November. After reviewing dense acquisition documents for hours, I developed a splitting headache. Daniel, I called out. Get me some aspirin. He appeared in my doorway almost instantly. Already have it, sir, he said, placing 2 pills and a glass of water before me. I noticed you squinting at the merit documents earlier. I swallowed the pills gratefully. Within 20 minutes, my headache subsided, but something else took its place, a peculiar haziness, as if I were viewing the world through a slight fog. The text on my computer screen seemed to waver, and my thoughts became strangely disconnected. Over the following weeks, similar episodes occurred with increasing frequency. Always after taking medication that Daniel provided, for headaches, for the occasional back pain, once for what he called stress relief when I was particularly agitated before a board meeting. Each time, the symptoms varied. Sometimes just a pleasant detachment. Other times, more disorienting, colors seemed more vivid, sounds more intrusive. During a client dinner, I could have sworn the paintings on the restaurant wall were subtly shifting. "Are you feeling all right, Victor?" James asked, noticing my distraction. "Fine," I said automatically. Just considering the implications of their expansion proposal. But I wasn't fine. Short-term memory lapses began to plague me, forgetting conversations immediately after having them, losing track of time in ways that left mysterious gaps in my day. "Mr. Harrington, you approved the Westridge divestiture this morning," Daniel informed me one afternoon when I asked about a property I believed we still owned. "I did no such thing," I insisted. "I have the signed authorization right here," he said gently, producing a document bearing what was unmistakably my signature. "We discussed it at length before your 11 a.m. call with Tokyo." I had no recollection of any such discussion, nor of the call that was indeed marked in my calendar as completed. The realization sent a chill through me, but I maintained my composure. "Of course," I said smoothly. "There's been a lot on my plate today." Daniel nodded sympathetically. "You've been working too hard. These new supplements should help with mental clarity," he added, placing a bottle of pills on my desk. "Many executives your age find them beneficial." I stared at the bottle, a growing suspicion taking root. "What exactly are in these?" "Just a proprietary blend of nootropics. All natural, of course. My previous employer swore by them." I nodded but didn't take any that day. Instead, I slipped the bottle into my briefcase, intending to have the contents analyzed. However, by the next morning, I had inexplicably forgotten this plan, and when Daniel offered my usual supplements with my coffee, I took them without question. Thus began a pattern I would only recognize in retrospect: moments of clarity and suspicion, followed by mysterious forgetting. Days blurred together. Decisions were made that I couldn't recall. Documents were signed, deals were closed, employees were hired and fired, all apparently with my authorization, but increasingly without my conscious participation. By Christmas, rumors had begun to circulate about my mental state. I overheard snippets of concerned conversation that stopped abruptly when I entered rooms. Board members exchanged meaningful glances during my presentations. And through it all, Daniel remained at my side, increasingly indispensable as my grip on reality became more tenuous. "Don't worry about the Friedman account," he would assure me when I struggled to recall details of a major client relationship. "I've prepared all the relevant materials. Just follow the talking points I've outlined." And I did. It was easier than confronting the terrifying reality that pieces of my mind seemed to be disappearing. The first concrete evidence came from an unexpected source: my granddaughter's birthday party. When I reluctantly set my phone aside to watch her open presents, an unfamiliar prescription bottle fell from my pocket. My daughter, a neurologist, frowned at the label. "This isn't a brand I recognize." "What's the active ingredient?" "Some proprietary blend." "My assistant handles it," I replied. Her frown deepened. "The one who called yesterday to cancel your annual physical? Said you were too busy this quarter?" This was news to me. I never canceled my physical. A strict regimen of preventative healthcare was part of how I maintained my edge. "Let me see that," I said, taking the bottle from her. For the first time, I actually looked closely at the unlabeled white pills I had been consuming daily for months. "I'd like to analyze one of these if you don't mind," Lauren said, her professional concern evident. "Something doesn't seem right." I hesitated, then tapped 2 pills into her palm. "Let me know what you find." 2 days later, her call came through as I was leaving the office. Daniel had already gone for the day, an unusual occurrence that had left me strangely uneasy, as if missing a limb. "Dad, where did you get those pills?" Lauren's voice was tight with controlled alarm. My assistant provides them. Why? What are they? They contain a cocktail of substances, including microdoses of LSD, ketamine, and several experimental compounds I can't even identify. Dad, these are psychoactive drugs that could cause exactly the kind of symptoms you've been experiencing: memory issues, disorientation, suggestibility. Who is giving these to you? The floor seemed to tilt beneath me as the pieces locked into place. I hadn't been experiencing cognitive decline, I had been systematically drugged. That night, I returned to my office after hours. The building was nearly empty, the silence oppressive as I rode the elevator back to the executive floor. My office was dark, but light burned in Daniel's adjoining workspace. Through the partially open door, I saw him methodically crushing white pills into a fine powder beside my monogrammed coffee mug. Cold rage flooded through me. I was about to push the door open when Daniel's phone rang. He answered on speaker, unaware of my presence. "Everything's proceeding as planned," he said without preamble. "He's completely compromised at this point. The board is starting to question his competence." "Good," replied a male voice. "Jenkins is prepared to call for a competency review. Once Harrington's voted out, the restructuring plan can move forward without interference." "And the documents?" Daniel asked. "All the evidence of financial malfeasance is ready to be discovered," the voice continued. "Between the apparent cognitive decline and the fabricated fraud, he'll be lucky to avoid criminal charges." Daniel smiled, a cold, satisfied expression I'd never seen on his face before. "Perfect. After what he did to Jeremy, destroying his career isn't enough. I want him to lose everything: his company, his reputation, his freedom. I want him to experience the same helplessness Jeremy felt when Harrington discarded him like garbage after 20 years of loyalty." Jeremy. The name hit me like a physical blow. Jeremy Ackerman, my former chief analyst who had suffered a nervous breakdown after I publicly berated him for a minor forecasting error 3 years ago. I had fired him on the spot, making an example of what I considered unacceptable mediocrity. "Just make sure you don't overdo the drugs," the voice on the phone cautioned. "We need him unstable but functional enough to be held accountable." "Don't worry," Daniel replied with chilling confidence. "I've been adjusting the dosage perfectly. By the time we're finished, Victor Harrington will be a case study in how the mighty fall." I backed away silently, my mind racing. The plot was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential consequences. Daniel had infiltrated my organization with the express purpose of destroying me from within. The drugs were making me increasingly passive and suggestible, while he systematically undermined my authority and created evidence of financial wrongdoing that would be attributed to me. Most disturbing of all was the realization that it was working. In the months since Daniel had become my assistant, I had surrendered more and more control, trusting his guidance without question as the drugs clouded my judgment. The board's concerned glances, the whispered conversations, the groundwork had already been laid for my removal. I retreated to my private elevator, my thoughts unusually clear now that the nature of my impairment had been revealed. I needed to act quickly, but carefully. In my compromised state, facing Daniel directly would be dangerous. He had already demonstrated his ability to manipulate me and would simply deny everything, perhaps administering an even stronger dose to ensure my claims sounded like paranoid delusions. No, I needed irrefutable evidence. And I needed an ally whose loyalty was beyond question. James Whittaker had been my friend since business school. We had built Harrington Financial from nothing, weathered recessions and personal crises together, stood as best men at each other's weddings. If there was one person in the world I could trust completely, it was James. I called him from the car. "We need to meet. Tonight. Not at the office or either of our homes." To his credit, James asked no questions. The club? Private dining room? Too obvious. The boat. I owned a small yacht docked at Chelsea Piers, rarely used in winter, which made it the perfect place for a conversation that couldn't be overheard or recorded. An hour later, we sat in the yacht's cabin, a bottle of Macallan 25 between us. I told him everything, the memory lapses, Lauren's analysis of the pills, the conversation I had overheard. James listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grave. "Jesus, Victor," he said when I finished. "This is diabolical." "And effective," I admitted. "If I walked into a board meeting tomorrow claiming my assistant is drugging me as part of an elaborate revenge plot, who would believe me? Especially given my erratic behavior over the past months." James nodded slowly. "We need evidence. Incontrovertible proof that can't be explained away as the delusions of an aging executive." The security cameras, I realized suddenly. Daniel wouldn't know about the secondary system. Following a corporate espionage attempt years earlier, I had installed a redundant security system in my private office, cameras so discreetly placed that even most of my security team was unaware of them. The footage wasn't monitored in real time but was stored on a secure server that only I could access. "If he's been tampering with your food and drink, we'll have it on video," James agreed. "But we need to be careful about how we retrieve it. If Daniel suspects anything, he might accelerate whatever timetable they're working on." We formulated a plan that was simple by necessity. James would invite Daniel to an early breakfast meeting the following morning, ostensibly to discuss a client both had connections with. Meanwhile, I would access the security footage from my home system, where I could review it without fear of interruption. "Once we have the evidence, we go to the board together," James said firmly. "With my corroboration and video proof, they'll have to take this seriously." I nodded, feeling a glimmer of the strategic confidence that had defined my career before Daniel's chemical interference. "And once the board understands I've been compromised against my will, any decisions or documents from the past 3 months can be called into question. Including whatever fraudulent evidence they've been planting," James concluded. "But Victor, you should be prepared, some of the damage to your reputation may be irreversible. There will be questions about how you could allow this to happen." It was a valid concern. In an industry built on the perception of perfect control, admitting I had been manipulated so thoroughly would undoubtedly weaken my position, regardless of the mitigating circumstances. "Better a damaged reputation than a prison cell," I replied grimly. "Besides, once I have proof of what they've done, I'll make sure Jeremy Ackerman and his accomplice face far worse consequences." The familiar hardness in my voice seemed to reassure James. This was the Victor Harrington he knew, the calculated fighter who had built an empire through relentless determination and strategic thinking. "Get some rest," he advised as we prepared to leave the yacht. "And Victor, don't eat or drink anything you haven't prepared yourself." I spent a sleepless night at home, jumping at every creak and shadow, half expecting Daniel or some unknown accomplice to materialize. By 6 a.m., I gave up on rest and logged into my home office system to access the security footage. The evidence was devastating. Video after video showed Daniel adding powder to my coffee, replacing pills in my desk drawer with identical-looking substitutes, even spraying a fine mist onto documents he knew I would handle extensively. Always when my back was turned or when I was out of the office, always with the calculating precision of someone who had planned each move meticulously. Most disturbing was footage from days when I had no memory at all. I watched myself signing documents with a vacant expression, nodding agreeably as Daniel explained what I was authorizing. In one particularly chilling video, I sat staring blankly at my computer for nearly an hour while Daniel systematically went through my files, photographing confidential documents with his phone. By the time James called to confirm Daniel had arrived for their breakfast meeting, I had compiled a devastating dossier of evidence. I downloaded everything to a secure drive and prepared to meet them at the office. "He doesn't suspect anything," James reported. "We're heading back now. Meet us in the conference room on 38, I've already arranged for security to be present." The confrontation was both more and less dramatic than I had anticipated. Daniel's confident smile faltered only slightly when he saw me waiting with James and 2 security officers in the empty conference room. "Mr. Harrington," he greeted me with perfect composure. "I didn't realize you'd be joining our debrief." I haven't prepared your morning briefing yet. That won't be necessary, Daniel, I replied coldly. Or should I call you by your real name? A flicker of something, concern, perhaps, but not yet fear, crossed his features. I don't understand, sir. Daniel Moore doesn't exist, I said, sliding a folder across the table. At least, not this Daniel Moore. The real one died in a car accident 5 years ago. You've been using his identity, his credentials, his entire professional history. This was a calculated guess based on James's overnight investigation, but the momentary widening of his eyes confirmed it. Still, he recovered quickly. There must be some mistake, he said with a nervous laugh. My records are all in order. HR thoroughly vetted my background. They vetted a ghost, James interjected. Very convincing documentation, I'll give you that. But ghosts don't cast shadows, and they don't appear on security footage tampering with their employer's food and medication. I placed my laptop on the table, turning the screen to face him. Would you like to explain what you're doing here, Daniel? Or should I play the one where you're photographing confidential client information? All pretense evaporated, replaced by cold hatred that transformed his face into something barely recognizable. You don't remember me, do you? His voice dropped to a register I'd never heard before. I was just another face in the accounting department 7 years ago when you implemented your efficiency purge. The memory surfaced hazily, a corporate restructuring that had eliminated nearly 30 positions. A necessary strategic decision during a market downturn. I worked 80-hour weeks for you, he continued, his composure cracking further. Missed my mother's funeral to complete the Anderson audit. Sacrificed my marriage, my health, everything for this company. And you eliminated my entire department with a single memo. That's business, I said dismissively. If you couldn't find another position. I found one, he cut me off. With Jeremy Ackerman. He hired me at his new firm, gave me a chance when no one else would. He was a good man. The best I've ever worked for. The past tense sent a chill through me. Was? His eyes hardened. He killed himself 6 months after you destroyed his career. The medication stopped working, the depression became too much, and he hung himself in his bathroom. His wife found him. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I'd heard Ackerman had suffered a breakdown, but not that he'd died by suicide. So this was all about revenge, I said, regaining my composure. Drugging me, sabotaging my company, trying to frame me for financial crimes, all because I fired Ackerman for incompetence? You didn't fire him for incompetence, Daniel snarled. You fired him because he challenged you in front of the board. Because he presented data showing your expansion strategy was fundamentally flawed. Because your ego couldn't handle being publicly contradicted, even when he was right. I remembered the incident differently. Ackerman had undermined my authority with poorly sourced projections. But even if his version were true, it didn't justify what he had done. You've committed multiple felonies, I pointed out coldly. Corporate espionage. Drugging me against my will. Identity theft. Conspiracy. You'll spend the next decade in prison. Daniel smiled then, a strange, almost peaceful expression. Maybe. But the damage is done. Your reputation is already compromised. The board has seen your erratic behavior, your failing memory, your increasingly poor judgment. The documents I've planted will be discovered regardless of what happens to me. And most importantly, for the past 3 months, you've experienced what Jeremy felt, the helplessness, the confusion, the sense that your own mind is betraying you. Security will escort you from the building, I said, signaling to the officers. The police are already on their way. As they moved to take him, Daniel looked directly into my eyes one last time. It was worth it, he said simply. For Jeremy, it was worth it. The legal consequences unfolded predictably. Daniel Baker, his real name, was arrested and charged with multiple felonies. The conspiracy ran deeper than I'd initially suspected. 3 other employees had been planted throughout the organization, all with connections to Jeremy Ackerman and all involved in fabricating evidence of financial misconduct that would have been attributed to me. The board, presented with irrefutable evidence of the plot against me, rallied behind my leadership. A carefully crafted press release explained my recent health issues as the result of deliberate poisoning by a disgruntled former employee's associate. My reputation took a hit. There were inevitable questions about how I could have been deceived so thoroughly, but the company remained stable. Privately, however, the experience changed me in ways I couldn't have anticipated. The months of chemical manipulation had left lingering effects, occasional memory issues, moments of disorientation, a newfound insomnia born of the fear that my mind might betray me again. Doctors assured me these symptoms would fade with time, but the psychological impact ran deeper than any medical test could measure. More unsettling were the questions that arose during my enforced period of recovery. Had I truly driven Jeremy Ackerman to suicide through my management style? Were there others who had suffered similar fates after crossing my path? The man I had been before Daniel, confident to the point of arrogance, uncompromising to the point of cruelty, now seemed like a stranger whose choices I was forced to reckon with. James noticed the change before anyone else. "You're different," he observed during a private dinner 6 weeks after Daniel's arrest. "More." He struggled to find the right word. "Human?" I suggested with a wry smile. He nodded thoughtfully. "Something like that." The old Victor would have pursued this vendetta relentlessly, made sure everyone involved was utterly destroyed, professionally and personally. It was true. My initial rage had given way to something more complex, not forgiveness, certainly, but perhaps a reluctant understanding. Daniel's methods had been inexcusable, but his motivation, in some dark corner of my consciousness, I recognized the pain that had driven him. "Nearly losing your mind gives you a certain perspective," I said finally. "Makes you consider what kind of legacy you're creating." 6 months later, I received an unexpected visitor at my weekend house in the Berkshires, Margaret Ackerman, Jeremy's widow. I had recently made a substantial anonymous contribution to the mental health foundation she'd established in her husband's name. "The drug cocktail Daniel used on you," she said after declining my offer of tea, "the one that made you doubt your own mind, that created gaps in your memory, that left you vulnerable to manipulation, it wasn't his invention. It was Jeremy's." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. What? My husband had a side interest in psychopharmacology. When his depression worsened after you fired him, he began creating his own compounds, trying to find something that would lift the darkness. Her voice remained steady, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped her hands together. "Daniel found Jeremy's notes after he died. The formula, the dosages, the anticipated effects, all documented with my husband's typical precision." I struggled to process this information. "So Daniel used Jeremy's own creation to give you a taste of what mental disintegration feels like." "Yes." For the first time, a flash of something, not quite satisfaction, but perhaps vindication, crossed her face. Poetic, in its way. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. "Because I wanted to see for myself what kind of man you've become. Daniel believed he'd changed you. I needed to know if he was right." "And your verdict?" I asked quietly. She studied me with the careful assessment of someone who had learned to look beyond surfaces. "The jury's still out, Mr. Harrington. But you're asking the question, that's something the man who fired my husband would never have done. People still ask me the secret to my success. These days, I give a different answer: surrounding yourself with people brave enough to tell you when you're wrong. They usually laugh, thinking it's false modesty from a business legend. They don't realize it's the most honest thing I've ever said."